Hey, it's 5.2, step 1. So cold, no fire can warm me. Analyzing and evaluating imagery and detail in poetry. Lesson objective is students will be able to analyze and evaluate imagery and detail in poems. The name of the lesson comes from a quote from Emily Dickinson. If I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. All right, we're going to take a look at one of her poems in this lesson and talk imagery and detail. So the question I want you to have in your mind, how can I analyze and evaluate imagery in poetry? This comes from our SCASI technique. In lesson 1, we talked about setting, characters, action, and ideas. Now we're going to get into the harder stuff. I'm sorry if you felt like the earlier stuff was harder. But this is a little bit harder because now we're getting into the analysis and evaluation of language. And so the second S stands for style. What's interesting about the words and the way they're arranged? We're going to look specifically and really only in this lesson at imagery. Okay? Here we go. What is imagery, you ask? It's the verbal representation of sensory experience. Is a nice, easy way to define it. So it's any detail in a poem that makes one of your 5 senses aroused, evokes one of or more of your 5 senses. It's when you can see a clear picture, when you can hear a clear sound, feel something specific in your body. And of course, we do have 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. And so you want to try to look for all of those as you are reading literature. I like the fancy words for them. Sight is also known as visual imagery, sound, auditory imagery, touch, tactile imagery, smell, it's my favorite one, olfactory imagery, taste, gustatory imagery. There they are. You don't have to use the fancy words, but I like them, so I thought I'd share them. The next question is, how do you analyze imagery? Ask yourself these questions. What senses does the imagery appeal to and how? So which of those 5 senses is being evoked? And keep in mind that when it's an image, it's not just that you can picture it, right? It's that a clear picture comes to mind. And so a good way to ask yourself if you have a good example of imagery is to say, would every reader have the same picture in their mind when they read this line? Would it be exactly the same? And if the answer is yes, and if the picture is very close to the same, you have even better examples of imagery, more evocative examples of imagery. Okay? How about this question? What is literally being described? Focus on that first. And then also look at what comparative imagery there is. What's being compared to what? Is there a simile, a metaphor? What figuratively is being described? What's interesting about the use of imagery? And what are some similarities and differences between the different images? What connections are there? And I'm going to lead you through a technique in this lesson that helps you do just that. Finally, looking at how the pattern works together, how these different images create meaning as a pattern. When you're doing the analysis, this is when you make non-debatable claims. A non-debatable claim is a claim that is true based on the words in the poem, and nobody could argue. It is a fact, okay? And so we focus on that when we analyze. Evaluation is the next step. How do you evaluate imagery? You're going to ask yourself these questions. What effects are created by the individual images? What does each image make you think, feel? What effects are created by the pattern of images? How do they work together? Sometimes they progress, they move from one kind of feeling or state to another. Sometimes they regress, they go the opposite. Sometimes they're very similar. Sometimes they're very different. But what seems to be the key repeating factor of certain images? What are the effects of the order of the images? What are the effects of the comparisons made in the comparative images? And this is where you're going to make debatable claims and then prepare to support them. So this is when we move past the literal and non-debatable, and you get to debatable interpretive claims that have to be supported in order to be proved. Okay, I think I'm in the right spot now. All right, so we're looking at this from After Great Pain, A Formal Feeling Comes by Emily Dickinson. Let me read it to you once, pausing only at punctuation. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious, like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore, and yesterday, or centuries before? The feet, mechanical, go round. A wooden way of ground, or air, or opt, regardless groan. A quartz contentment, like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered, if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow. First, chill, then stupor, then the letting go. All right, Emily Dickinson did not title her poems, so that's why we call it After Great Pain, A Formal Feeling Comes, or 372. It's the first line of the poem. All right, so we're looking at imagery. The first step is to make sure we understand the literal meaning of the poem, right? So doing the SCA in SCASI will help us to do that. We have no clear setting in this poem, and so it's a little bit different than the poems we've seen so far, but we can tell that the situation is reflecting on the effects of experiencing great pain because of the first line. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The characters are certainly the speaker. We always have a speaker in poems, right? But I don't think there are any other characters in the poem. So we've got the speaker who has experienced great pain and describes its effects. The action is really the effects of great pain, and we see what they are. The dash shows us that that the speaker is talking about this phrase in the first line, in a continued way. So the actions here are the nerves sit ceremonious, the heart is stiff and asks questions, the feet move mechanical, and then we also have freezing persons, feeling the snow, remembering it, and then letting go. All right, so maybe the SCA in this poem is a little different than the others. Maybe it's a little obvious, maybe it's not obvious, but I wanted to show you how it works in different types of poems. When we get to ideas, we're probably looking at the after effects of grief and trauma, right? And how they are explored as formal, stiff, mechanical, and then as letting go. All right, so now to imagery, and that is style, right? The guiding question for this poem is, how is imagery used to convey the speaker's feelings? And so that's a pretty general, generic guiding question, but it focuses us on imagery, so we will take that and use this strategy of answering questions about 3 key images. So let's explore what senses are evoked first. I think that we have some pictures that come to the mind's eye here. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. We all have a similar picture for sitting, for tombs, so it's a clear visual imagery. Stiff heart as well. The feet mechanical go round, so we can imagine feet going round in a mechanical kind of way. Wooden, we might have similar images. Ground, air. Quartz is a kind of stone, and if you know what it is, you're picturing the same thing. And then the simile like a stone, we're all picturing the same thing when we hear stone. So those are good examples of visual imagery. As far as auditory imagery goes, we don't have a lot of it in this poem. Maybe this question, but it doesn't work as a great image, I don't think, because we aren't all hearing the same thing. It's just actually dialogue that we can imagine hearing. Maybe not the best example of imagery. How about tactile imagery? I think tactile imagery comes up in these places that I've highlighted, and you can tell that they, are blending with, they're overlapping the sight imagery, right? But it's good to kind of just, think through all of the ways that your senses are evoked when you read a poem. So you can imagine sitting ceremonious like a tomb. You can really feel that and how that would be, still in your body, right? You would not be moving, and you'd probably be sitting really upright. Stiff heart, you can feel stiff, that word in particular. How about wooden or ground or air? Those are tactile images that we can feel with our touch, our sense of touch. Quartz contentment, like a stone, you can feel the cold, smooth feeling of a stone. The quartz, the hard, rigid surface of a quartz. Hour of lead. Lead, I think, creates a tactile image. We can feel the heaviness, the smoothness, the coldness, and certainly we can feel the freezing and the snow. For smell and taste, I don't know. We don't have great examples, but just to show you that, our senses are evoked, our smell and taste senses are evoked with certain words that we wouldn't normally want to smell or taste. Think about wooden, ground, and what kind of senses you can actually smell and taste, right? We don't want to taste the ground. It's not a great thing to taste. Brings to mind memories of Kiowa a little bit, but we certainly can imagine what that tastes like, and so it does evoke those sense of taste, or the sense of taste and smell. Stone, lead, snow as well. Okay, so I think these are the key images, and if you want to take a pencil or a highlighter at this point, you might want to mark these in the poem. We've got the nerves sit ceremonious like tomb, the stiff heart questions, the feet mechanical go round, a wooden way of ground or air, a quartz contentment like a stone, the hour of lead, and freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill. Stupor, then letting go, I'm not sure if that works as imagery. We could debate that one maybe. Okay, so let's tackle these questions now. The first question, and you can write whatever you like. You can use any of my examples or not. And I haven't finished all of these questions, so you will have to finish some of them on your own. So the first is an immediate response. Make a quick graphic response. Draw, list what you see or hear, list images, write questions, list phrases. I think of this girl or something like it, like bored in church. She's not really sitting very upright like I was talking about, but she certainly seems like she's in a ceremonious pose. And write whatever comes to your mind, or draw whatever comes to your mind. This is a part to just let your senses be evoked and have that kind of personal response with the text. Okay, the next thing is to pick 3 images that you want to investigate. So these are the 3 I'm going to pick. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs, the feet mechanical go round, and a quartz contentment like a stone. All right. The third question is to respond to the images you've chosen separately. And so for each image, you're going to answer these questions. So the first one, what does the image make you think of? What does this image make you see, hear, smell, taste, feel, touch, and emotion? Imagine. What does it remind you of? Now the second, now the third. So I didn't write this in, but I might say something for the nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. It makes me think of sitting in church when I was a little girl and how important it was to be silent and still. And, you know, it was very, in my family anyway, it was very, you know, frowned upon to make any kind of movements or draw any kind of attention to yourself. And it just often felt very devoid of feeling, you know, a little bit like a tomb. And that's what it makes me think of. So I could jot that down. What does it make me see, hear, smell, taste, touch? The sitting posture, it makes me feel. The tombs, it makes me see this great big stone structure inside of which there are buried people, and so it's kind of haunting. It makes me feel cold and unmoving. It reminds me of, you know, hearing about the old tombs from the Bible where, you know, there were giant stones that were rolled away to get people in and out. So you can tell that all of those answers are very personal to me, right? And I told you earlier that the best kind of imagery is the kind that creates the same picture for everybody's mind. But I do have my own personal, you know, sort of connections with nerve ceremonies like tombs, and that's okay. That's great. And so you can, you know, spend some time thinking about it and writing about it. When you get to the actual writing of the essay, you're not going to write, you know, it reminds me of being in church as a little girl and I hated it. Okay. But right now, as we're doing this initial brainstorming, you're going to write those kinds of things and let your answers just be kind of these initial brainstorming responses where you are feeling and writing down what you feel. So you do that for all three, and then you move on and you look at how the images connect with each other. So I'm going to take this image, the nerve ceremonies like tombs, and the feet mechanical go round, and I'm going to look at how those two relate to each other. What are the links between the images? What connections may be? Similarities or differences, progressions, regressions. So for this one, I think the thing that comes to my mind is the lack of feeling in the action. So if your feet are mechanical going round, you're not putting any feeling in that action. They're just moving like a robot. And if I'm sitting ceremonious like a tomb, same thing, right? There's not a lot of thought or feeling that's happening in these behaviors. So that's a connection that I saw. For this one, the tombs and the third image, a quartz contentment like a stone, I think immediately that what comes to my mind is the stillness and the hard rock quality, right, of a tomb and then a stone. The feet mechanical go around in a quartz contentment like a stone. There's something that seems similar between mechanical and stone to me. Maybe it is like a lack of humanity, right? Back to sort of that unfeeling, unthinking aspect. And then how are all three images connected? And so I might mention those same things that I've said, because I think in all three we see that there is a stillness, or at least a lack of action with thought, and a kind of a cold sense in all three. Okay, next, how do the images have an effect on the poem? Feel free to use these sentence starters. They create the idea that, they create a feeling of, they suggest. Here I completed one. I said they create a feeling of coldness and emptiness and automatic behavior without thought. So that's how all three images have an effect on the poem. The last question is the trickiest. This is to make an arguable assertion. This is where we get to the interpretive part. Where you are going beyond the literal, about the poem as a whole. How do the ideas above coalesce? How do they all come together into a singular thought or feeling? And here's what I came up with, and this isn't just the only answer, right? But this was what I noticed. The imagery suggests that after great pain, an individual is left with a lack of feeling, action, and thought, which distances them from feeling human. All right, feel free to use the notes that I've taken and write them in your packet. add to them where there are spaces still, where there are blanks still. And then you're going to do your own for the next poem, which follows the imagery questions and is on the poem called Flounder. Thanks. Let me know how I can assist.